that's okay with all of you. So after the crisis, what does minute 325 means for shared waters between Mexico and the US? As all of you or most of you remember, we had a crisis, a storm last year, a little bit before, a couple of months before October, because Mexico was not able to fulfill or allocate the water allotment that it was supposed to deliver to the US after the 35 cycle. So a lot of things happened in Mexico in terms of crisis, political crisis, social crisis, water crisis, a lot of stakeholder involvement, and there was a domestic issue, and there was a binational issue. And then October came in, and Mexico and the US finally agreed to put an end, at least a temporary end or an annual end to this problem. And that was minute 325. And just a background of what minutes, the minute actually says, I guess there are three main issues or agreements that Mexico and the US signed, which was that Mexico was going to pay or allocate the water that owed to Texas from Amistad and Falcon Dam instead of the usual water deliveries that come from Rio Conchos. That was one thing. The second, because of the first agreement, is Mexico was putting at risk water to the states of Nuevo León, Coahuila, and Tamaulipas downstream, because that water is usually committed to downstream users. So the second agreement is that Texas, or US, but in this case, Texas will, for humanitarian reasons, if Mexico falls below the 100 million cubic meters, then the US will supply Mexico with water in case of that scenario. And the third, it was that Mexico and the US agree to have a working group that will work on modeling and predictability. They actually use that word on water in the Rio Grande Basin, water used for future water allocations. That's a summary on my words, and the speakers of today or guests of today will do it much better than I do. So I'm going to introduce our first panelist is Samuel Sandoval Solis. Is this slow or is just me?
I think you're good.
I'm good? I'm not
Yes.
seeing it.
Yeah, it is not switching there.
Okay, here it is. Samuel Sandoval, as he is our Associate Director of Permanent Forest of National Waters, responsible for the Water Management and Policy Research Program at the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Division. He is working on strategies to improve the water management for anthropogenic and environmental requirements by developing reservoir reoperation policies to improve the human and environmental water requirements. We have Dr. Gabriel Eckstein. He's a professor of law at Texas A&M University. He's expert, advisor, and consultant on international environmental and water law issues at domestic, that sounds very long, at domestic and international level. He's the current president of the International Water Resources Association. His research focused on natural resources and environmental issues at both the national and transboundary levels, as well as the interrelationship of law and science. We also have Carlos Rubinstein today. He served as chairman of the Texas Water Development Board from 2013 and 2015. He served as Texas representative to the Western States Water Council and the Board of Governors Conference Sustainable Development Work Table. Thank you, Carlos, for being here today. And we also have Mario López. He has 39, I would say close to 40 or 40 years of experience, because this was from last year, probably, in water and environmental issues. Mario does research in integrated water resources management, water science, and water management, planning, and law. He currently works as independent consultant. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. We'll talk about this later. And I'm going to give the room to Samuel with the first big question related to our topic today. So what does, I already give a very brief and rudimentary background of what Minute 35 says, but what does it really entails? And you all have 2 minutes, and I'm going to start with Samuel.
So what does it entail? So I think, yeah, what you mentioned is a very good summary. I think what it does entail is we had a crisis. It worked out. It was a very successful minute. For those of you who are looking for that document, I'm going to paste it on the chat so any one of you can take a look at it. It is a short document. It is a 4-page document. So one of the things is that it helped to solve the crisis. It shouldn't have been a crisis. That's something that we can discuss later, but it shouldn't have been a crisis. We had at least a year and 2 months in advance notice. We knew that it was coming. So that was kind of the first thing, that it shouldn't be a crisis. The second one is that it is also a proposition for what is going to happen in the future, which is developing this group, organizing some strategies. Some of those strategies will require water conservation or evaluate strategies for conservation. And then the next one will be that this is the preamble of another minute that it is due to December 2023. So this is just kind of, think of this as like a Star Wars saga. This is just the first episode, and no, I think this is more than it's like the 9th episode. But definitely there is another minute to come. I think that's what it entails. It really entails a little bit of fixing the crisis or helping with the crisis, and a little bit trying to come up with the solutions, long-term solutions, and that will be December 2023.
Thank you, Samuel. Carlos, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, happy to. Under protest, because Mario gets to go last and I wanted to go last. So Mario will have fun with all of our answers, I'm sure. I think you gave an excellent summary of the plain reading of the minute. And I agree with what someone stated, but I'll tell you, in reading it, there were a couple of things that, for those of us that have fortunately or unfortunately had to deal with this in the past, it was a lot of revisiting of things we've tried to do before. You talk about, and first let's start out. Any agreement that maintains the amicable relationship and the sharing of waters should be celebrated. And as such, this minute should be celebrated for that. And yeah, there's people that are gonna wish they got more or some different terms. Look, unless you're in that room and subject to the discussions that are going on, we should not second guess it. But the minute does try a couple of things that we have tried before in the early 2000s. We have met, we being those of us that are involved in protecting the Rio Grande, on ways of modeling and assessing how to better determine the flows and the impacts on the entire basin to the users. And I remember multiple trips to Monterrey, El Paso, Mexico City, Juarez, wherever, DC, where we had those discussions. And while they were fruitful in sharing data, it didn't really end up helping finding a solution, a permanent solution. And I hope that history doesn't repeat itself this time around. And you can see that if you want to look at the history I'm talking about, pick up and read 307, 308, and 309, and you'll see where I'm coming from 20 years later. There are several things in the minute that I think are hugely important, and I'm glad to have seen them there. The reaffirmation of what Article 4 calls for and the preservation of rights for the United States under Article 4 is very clearly stated in the minute, and I welcomed that and was pleased to see it. The reaffirmation of the applicability and the flexibility under Minute 234 was clearly restated in the minute, and I welcomed that. And something that I thought was not going to be included, but was, and I am most happy about, is the flexibility in the treaty under Article 9, where some folks simply don't want to talk about Article 9, but I think that that's really where the solution, long-term solution to our problems will come from. So those are the things that when you read between the lines or reading tea leaves, I found to be of greatest benefit.
Thank you, Carlos.
You bet.
Gabriel?
All right, thank you, Rosario. So what does Minute 325 entail? We know what the details are, but I think the bigger picture, there's two ways to look at it, at least from my perspective. One, it's a political solution. It's a political solution to a difficult situation, which, yes, was between the U.S. and Mexico, but I have to say it's a political solution to a domestic problem. The larger problem was within Mexico, not between the U.S. and Mexico. But this was a political solution between the two countries. So to some extent, this is a recognition in the U.S. that the U.S. also had to bend to some extent to recognize the political problem in Mexico and to accommodate it to some extent. Now, obviously, Mexico also had to accommodate this, but I think this is something that's going to fall on Mexico's shoulders in the future much more heavily than on the U.S. We can talk about the political situation in Mexico too later, but the other point I want to make is that this is also what I would call a legal solution. The solution was worked out within the contours of the treaty. So within the treaty language, this is legal in the sense of the law that's in the treaty. But I think it's also legal in the sense of broader international water law, because this was done, in the context of, the cooperation, which is a legal norm between nations to cooperate over freshwater resources, peaceful resolution of disputes, sharing and developing of data and information. They have this agreement to have these two groups, committees set up, and so on. So I think in that sense, you have a political outcome or political content and a legal content that's coming out of this agreement.
Thank you, Gabriel. And I know, Mario, you want to jump in.
Sorry, I was muted. I disagree on what has been said. That's the reason I wanted to be the fourth bat.
Of course.
to kick the ball out of the stadium. First, it entails a new reminder that, I agree on that, is a new reminder for Mexico to comply with the treaty as it has been signed, even in drought conditions, such as the one that has been occurring until today. This is the first thing that I see. The second thing, it is, I fully endorse what Gabriel said regarding the domestic problem in Mexico. It is a work proposal. The minute is a working proposal in the interior of Mexico, not very different from the one that we began in the 2000s. But due to changes in the Mexican federal government and incapable people in Conagua, you might say, officials who misled the process and needs to be restarted in adverse situations of drought and social unrest. This is a fact. And the third thing is it is a new form of binational framework that requires tempering and takes time. Time that it is precious as it was in the Colorado. I see many people from Colorado here that wouldn't disagree on this. Time was precious in Colorado. The process was not rushing to fast conclusions and disagreements that we had in the process that we surely will have in the Bravo. Both sides, Mexico, US, needs to understand that this is a process that will have bumps in the road. It will be sweets all around. But the problem that I see that this entails is who will have the clear mind and the mental stability to cool down the partners. I don't see them. Those are my thoughts.
So, Mario, what part do you actually do not agree with? Is not a success?
No, it is not a success. It is not a success for Mexico. It is a success for the basin. It is a success for the US because it gives security, but not for Mexico. I don't see it as a Mexico. I can explain a little bit more in the next round of questions. I don't see this for Mexico a good negotiation.
Okay, so let's move forward with the following, so we can jump into that part. So was minute 325 a success, and for Mexico, for the U.S., for both, for the basin, and here I really want you to expand a little bit on your thoughts on the future after this, and what this really means for the future. Not just for the U.S. or for Mexico, but for the basin, and not just U.S. and Mexico stakeholders, right? The people that actually use the water and need the water, irrigators, states in the case of Mexico, irrigation districts, etc. So I'm going to start with Samuel.
So I think I think it was a success for certain portions, and I would agree with Mario that it was not successful in certain things. So I think it was successful because, we fulfilled the commitments, or the commitments were fulfilled. I think something that it was a very good success is to show partnership and collaboration. And I think everyone has to remember that this minute of closing the cycle, and then the EU is lending water to Mexico, that this happened under Trump administration. This is a federal person from the Trump administration helping out Mexico. So I think that was a very good signal. The other one that I think it was a success is in terms of showing leadership. And in that one, you need to name it, to provide the names. I mean, Jane Harkins and Roberto Salmon. I mean, that was good leadership. I think that went well. What it was not successful for me, it was not successful for Tamaulipas. If any one of you, I'll send you the link. Take a look at the reservoirs. They are super empty. They are empty. So no water for Tamaulipas. Still people, the polarization that we have, it just got exacerbated. So we have that part of polarization. I do think that it was a success, and not in the following. And this is what I still cannot wrap my head around. So every time that you talked about delivering water from Mexico to the US, and that it is very variable throughout the years, you will hear from people from the US, IBWC, they will tell you like, hey, well, we always deliver water in the Colorado in a timely manner. And here in the Bravo, you deliver it whenever you can. I do think that what is proposed in there is to have a more formal understanding, is to have a more organized they call it reliable and predictable water deliveries. And we know that it is the Rio Bravo is super unreliable, unpredictable. Nonetheless, I think we have found strategies to mitigate to go into such a mess like the one that we had on cycle 35. So that's what I think Mexico may lose the flexibility on those. I think that might be a loss, but at the same time, what I'm seeing is that it's been almost 70 years and this hasn't worked that well. So anyway.
Thank you, Samuel. Carlos?
I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I think if you're going to keep a scorecard of winners and losers, it is more than what we would think. Certainly, the Tamaulipas is the biggest loser here. Maybe. I think the bigger loser is the river itself. The ecosystem is being destroyed by the lack of predictable flows that not only would satisfy the obligations under the treaty for Mexico to the U.S., but also for its downstream users. So I also agree that if you're a Mexican user below the Concho, not such a good deal. The other part, what I was concerned about when the minute was announced was the inclusion of the humanitarian aid of water, which look, none of us are ever going to withhold that. Anybody that wants to argue against it, I don't want to be part of that discussion because that's just not the way the thing should be handled, right? But we've had this before. When Tony Garza was an ambassador, we had a similar minute that contemplated a water loan to Mexico. My concern is you have a minute that doesn't solve the sustainability issues going forward, doesn't solve the issues of impact to the river itself, doesn't solve anything for Tamaulipas at all, and actually potentially sets up the irrigators in Texas for failure. So you have an agreement in October to transfer the water and call it good for the cycle. You then have farmers in the valley making decisions based on the water that is available to them at that time, November, December, for what they're going to plant in February. What if, God forbid, we have a drought like 2011, and you look at the map, we certainly are pointing in that direction, and God forbid, we do have to have a water loan to Mexico for humanitarian purposes, which I support 100%. That water would come from the same irrigators that you think you benefited by doing the transfer in October. That is not a way to manage a basin. And I'll leave it at that. Mario likes it. I like it. I'm good.
Gabriel?
I'm not going to disagree with anything that anybody has said. I think they're absolutely right. Maybe I'll take what Carlos was saying. I'll build on this a little bit. You can talk about success for the United States. Agreed. I will also argue this is success for the treaty regime and international law. I don't think this is successful for Mexico, but I also don't think that Mexico had much of a choice. They dug a hole, such a big hole, that this was really their only option. And it was so right at the very end of that cycle. They had no choice but to do. So is that successful for them? I don't think so. But I don't think they have much of a choice. But I think we have to measure success in a different way. The way I just described measuring success in terms of, United States or Mexico or international law, I'm not sure that's fair. In the chat, some folks are asking about, what about the stakeholders? Where are the stakeholders? And Carlos is raising, what about the irrigators? What about the farmers? What about the actual users? And I don't think we're taking a broad enough picture of what success could mean or should mean. This is really oversimplified when we're just saying, oh, was this amendment or 325 minute successful? And I don't even think that IBWC is taking it to that next level of trying to measure success. Now, maybe that's not their job to do it, but I think it is the job of the Mexican government and the US government and the local governments to define what is success locally and regionally. And I don't think we're doing that. If we were to look at that, then we start looking at, well, was it successful for the farmers downstream, Tamaulipas? What about upstream on the Conchos? What about the folks downstream on the U.S. side, in the Rio Grande? And then we start balancing these things out. And then, of course, the river itself, the ecosystem, the habitats, and so on, that's not even on the table. And so I think the question of success is, I'm not even sure if it's relevant at this point, because we don't want to apply the notion of success to the things that need to be evaluated.
Mario, you can't disagree with anything, and you're muted.
Now we're talking. So we changed from a successful minute to a not a good successful, but rather a bit successful, okay? One thing, as I said, for the basin and for the US, it was a success, quote unquote, because of what it has already been said, predictability and the security for the US that Mexico will, quote unquote, comply. Because it stands in the replication of a successful process in the Colorado River that took time, patience, and intense work to build. That's a fact. For Mexico-US relationship, I wouldn't think it called it a success. Rather, an announced, as Carlos said, an announced step forward of what we have been doing in the previous years. Carlos knows very well what we were aiming at that time, which is no different on what we see in the minute. Having said that, I want to create more controversy, but that's how I see it. And as a professional, what I have heard from many other people who are not part of this panel. For Mexico only, here we go, the home run. I think it was a mistake. What was signed due to ignorance, or rather incompetence in the negotiation, if there was one. I don't think it were a negotiation. Gabriel said it. Mexico had domestic problems. So there were no negotiation. Let me explain a little bit more. There are parts of the minute, as Samuel said, that need to be clarification. Other parts have not been quite understood, and others need better explanation. For example, signing a minute. Here we go, signing a minute to confirm the closure of cycle 25 seems necessary, yes, but not to mix it with other themes which were not thoroughly discussed and analyzed in the Rio Bravo basin context. That's my thought. Signing a minute, here I go once again, putting the words humanitarian reasons is inexplicable for many of us who know the history and the hydrology of the basins, who know that the inflows to the international dams in that period of time would have been accomplished without putting these words that are a damage to the image of the professionals in Mexico. With all, I apologize for what I say. We are not Haiti. We are not the Comoros Islands. We are not Vanuatu, who need humanitarian reasons to be helped. Carlos said, we had passed this many times before, and signing a minute with that is inexplicable. Really, it is inexplicable. Another thing, the threshold of 160 million cubic meters, it is very low threshold. So the US knew, the professionals in the US knew that we would reach that threshold. Surely, that's what they signed for. The Mexicans didn't know because they didn't know the basin. They didn't know the hydrology. The Mexicans who signed the minute are not good professionals, at least from what I see and what I have heard from many other people. That puts the Mexican authorities who accepted this to the real level of incompetence and damaging the image of many of us who would have negotiated very differently. And finally, not clarifying the implications for Mexico of what a hydrological policy and modeling group represents and the outputs and outcomes from a binational model of the basin to generate scenarios. It is not written. You need to read the Colorado. We have very clear understanding of what that means. What are the outcomes of that policy groups? In this minute, as it is signed, it is not very clear. The Colorado process was slower and more carefully. I reiterate, 325, Mexico did not negotiate wisely. They mixed teams. We need to close the cycle. Yes, we need a minute, but not mix it with something that was not very properly thought. Mexico hastened to sign and to comply with the date of the closure of the cycle and made awful mistakes in some parts of the minute. That's how I see it. That's the reason why I don't think it was a success for Mexico. That's my point.
Okay, so, and I'm glad that you're closing it because you're giving me round to start with the, so what were other alternatives viable? I mean, and I'm not gonna start with you, but I'm taking your last point. So if this is not the way it should have been done, at least not for the Mexico side, how it should be done, how it should have been done. What were other alternatives?
So,
And I'm going to start with Sam.
Hey, so basically, I think we have to go back to what Gabe was mentioning and the definition of success, because if you look at so ultimately, I mean, it was successful, or it was fulfill the responsibilities. And I think sometimes we just look at within that kind of responsibility microcosm. It is not what Gabe or Carlos mentions, which is we fulfill our obligations to the neighbor or to a document. Did we do it for a given group of water users? So I think that was a part that was missing out. And that is not the success so if we define success in terms of fulfilling responsibilities, those were there. I do think with what Mario is mentioning, I was closer with some of those arguments, and I think so. Some of the technical people that talked in this, it wasn't bad at all. I think this was more political decisions on the Mexican side. I don't think the technical people. So the technical people were listened but not heard. They give it. I think that will be my understanding. Were there other alternatives? Yes. And this is again here we go back again, Mario and I. So it was in 1 year, a year and 2 months before the closure of the cycle 35, so before the deadline. And the two of us, we were in a meeting with all the stakeholders, with all the authorities, and we called the wolf. We said like, hey, if we're finishing the year 4, it's very likely that in year 5, we're not gonna finish. So the authorities have a year and 2 months in advance. And let me tell you this, it is not, so the authorities, even though we have a large authority group, there are very few that take the decisions, or there are very few that handle this. And that one was handled super, it wasn't handled. Some of the authorities, they really wanted to take charge of it. Some of the other ones, they were just kind of seated on their hands. It will also came a lot of the political negotiations from governors with the president. That wasn't that good. What I will say in terms of the solutions were already discussed, and we were discussing it for about at least a year in advance. But having the solution, it wasn't necessary what it ended up doing, which is the political decisions. And that is, to me, that is the most difficult. It is the saddest part to discuss, which is sometimes the political decisions affect technical decisions that they were actually penciled out. It wasn't that people didn't know what to do. People knew what to do, but the decisions were made in a given direction or were not given. And I think that's what he said, that the political thing stumbled us.
So what were they supposed to do? What would they know to do?
Yeah, I mean, the releases, and you can actually see November, December, it was a lot of, so they were start releasing water from Chihuahua. So that was the first thing. Second thing, it was that not all the water allocation for Chihuahua should have been approved. It was approved at the beginning 80%, and then later they increased it to 100%. It didn't save any water at all. I think that one was a huge mistake. When they give the leeway to Chihuahua to increase that allocation, man, that was, I think that was a huge mistake. The third one is that they put first the military campaign instead of the communications campaign. And they later backpedal like, okay, yeah, we have a problem here with the army going into the dams. Let's first put the communication campaign. What I always talked about is Rosario, the lies or the half-truths. People were saying half-truths. And that is super sad. On the federal government, on the state government, people were just saying the truths that they wanted until a certain point. And that really put it back. It wasn't beneficial. People with political agendas, and the same as we have nationalistic people on the US, it is exactly the same in Mexico. And that was also said, because no one says when you're talking with them, oh yeah, I'm a citizen of the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo Basin. Everyone will say that I'm from Mexico, from the US. No one put the interest of the basin up front. The success, our destinies are linked together. If it goes well for Mexico, it will go well to the States. If it goes well to the States and now they are lending some water to Mexico, it will go good to Mexico. That is a difficult reality for some politicians or some people to chew that one. Anyway, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Samuel. Carlos?
Interesting question. Were there other alternatives? Alternatives are, in this regard, are tied to time. Were there alternatives in October when the treaty had to be signed, the minute had to be signed? No. Waited too damn long. Were there alternatives 2 years ago? Some. The real issue, what we're not talking about, is what has really caused this problem. This problem goes back to 1992. Mario knows exactly what I'm going to say. When Mexico changed the different ways it was allocating water and try to harmonize it all into one, and the math didn't work out, that's where you stopped having the ability to have solutions. So until you change that, we're not going to have alternatives. We're going to continue to have creative ways of fixing things, but not getting to the point where you can actually get a model from Mexico and you can actually pinpoint where water for the US has been allocated for treaty compliance. That doesn't exist today, and it can't, because it is counter to what occurred in 1992 to 1995. Mario and I recognized it. We were working on a process 2013, 2014 to try to alleviate that. it would require that the cooperation of Texas and the U.S. in the flexibility of Article 9. And you know what? It is giving a little on Article 9 by the U.S. will go also a long way in getting Mexico to correct its imbalance on water that dates back to 1992. I'll leave it there.
Gabriel?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what else can be said. You know, what alternatives were there under the situation? Yes, we can talk about different scenarios, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years ago, if things were different. But under the situation, there was really very little that Mexico could have done. And from the U.S. side, I don't know if the U.S. really had a choice. You know, of course, they could have said, "Yeah, we'll give up this cycle and we won't hold you to obligations." The U.S. cannot do that. There's a treaty regime, and they need to abide by the regime in order to ensure that the regime has a system, a process, and you can't just make exceptions and excuses here and there. And the only other thing I will say is that you have these two levels of politics that have to be coordinated. You have your domestic politics, and even the U.S. You have the State Department, IBWC. They have to work with Texas. They have to work with New Mexico. They have to have everybody sort of on the same page to make sure that whatever obligations are on the U.S. side are complied with. Well, everybody has to be on that same page, and you have to have the same situation in Mexico. And then you can have that bilateral level of politics work out. And if you don't coordinate all those, it just doesn't work. And so, if any one of those parts doesn't work, you're just completely eliminating a whole host of alternatives. And that's what happened. Virtually any other alternative was completely eliminated. Now, was it 2 days before the deadline, 2 years, 20 years before? I mean, yes to all of them. There's just no alternative in that sense.
Thank you, Gabriel. Mario?
The privilege of being the fourth path. I endorse many of the things that have been said by my three colleagues, particularly the Mexican hydrological imbalance. It is the elephant in the room in every negotiation, even within Mexico. The Mexican federal authorities don't see the elephant. They don't want to see it. And the communication part, it is more than a fact. The worst management that the Mexican federal government approached the Chihuahua people, it is really a failure for everybody, not only for Mexico. Well, having said that, I reiterate, I would have separated two themes in 2 different minutes with 2 different timings. Time, it is really a matter. One thing is the closure of the cycle. With the worst ever management of the system that I have seen in Mexico, the worst, flushing every water from the dams. Not only Tamaulipas is suffering now, Monterrey is suffering, Chihuahua is suffering, Coahuila is suffering. Who made that mess? Those guys that are out now from Mexico, are out from the Mexican federal government. Those guys, those incompetent guys that I reiterate to them. Differentiating what should be done. The next step that we envisioned with Carlos and with other people at that time. This is the thing that should be better thought from the Mexican authorities. I would think positively that Conagua had not clarity at that time to think, due to the published events of the end of September, where the Mexican officials were changed and kicked out from the Mexican federal government because of corruption, of incompetence, and many other things. I must say that also making an incomplete copy of the Colorado solutions was not the proper answer. Many things are missing from the successful case, not a copy-paste, but thinking about the Colorado, thinking about the Bravo. Conagua is not the USBR, has not the capabilities, has not the infrastructure. The 5 states in Mexico have not the same capabilities of the 7 states in the Colorado. There are enormous differences among these 2 basins that should have been considered in the negotiation. In this part, this is what I'm saying that should be different. This is the alternative. They should have considered timing in the goals, the timing of when to install, to receive information, when to reach the allocation rules, the possibilities of that things. Condition and storage capacity of the hydraulic infrastructure in Mexico, it is very different than in the US, in the Colorado. Huge difference. I don't mean that need to be increased the storage in Mexico, no, but better managed. And taking into consideration the imbalance, the Mexican imbalance, not only in Chihuahua, also in Tamaulipas we have imbalance, and that is a fact. And nobody is, again, another elephant in the room. Another thing that had to be considered is the social situation of the Mexican producers and the states. And sorry to reiterate, the absence of water authority. This has given us the path to what we are looking at right now, the present situation in the basin. Mexico is struggling to deliver the first 1 year allocation. Mexico is calling for a drought. The general director of Conagua has been reiterating this the last 3-4 weeks, saying that Mexico is on the drought. Wow, what a news. The drought has come in 2019 in the basin. Come on. Where were the authorities then? I don't see it. And also, in Mexico, we have a basin council. In the Colorado, there's no basin council. We have managed to integrate the basin council, to put the stakeholders in the decision, to bring them into the reality, to say them, there's more water users than water available. And that was one of the first goals of the Basin Council. That has not been considered in the negotiation of the minute. I insist, Mexico rushed and failed.
Thank you, Mario. Do you guys want to replicate on Mario's temper?
Yeah, I do, but more than replicate. I think he's actually talking about the symptoms, because I mean the minute and why we got there, it was just about temperature. I mean that was, yeah, we got there because those were the symptoms, not the disease. And Mario is talking about the disease, which is over allocation, is that we have these incredible large units of water. The other one is kind of a long-lasting view of the water in Mexico, which is my river, my reservoir, my water. And what you can see, the division in there is that I have my irrigation district, I have 2 reservoirs, that's my river, that's my water. And whoever is downstream, I don't know, who cares? And I'll fight to the death on this water. So I think that's one of the things. The disease, I think, is it is also in terms of the handling of the situation. And when I say the handling, is that there was information, there were people qualified, and there were the few. And the few did, I don't know, it wasn't that well directed. I don't think it was even consulted technically. And I think that was very, very sad. In that one, something that I don't want to mention, and I don't know, people from the Basin Council in Mexico, I think they tried to do their best, or it was a good effort. I could see that one as a good avenue or good group of people, but the same like many of us. Yeah, you were just speaking to the wall. I mean, it wasn't sometimes that you were listened that much. And that was very sad. I think that was very sad with all the expertise. I think perhaps what you were saying of what can we expect after this minute or so is, I think, a more open discussion like what we're having here. Here, who lost? Here? It lost everyone. I think everyone, from the river, from the farmers, from the political visions in there. We kicked the can, so it wasn't, we figure out how to keep maintaining or fulfill responsibilities. We give it an aspirin, or I don't know, a Tylenol for the temperature, but really the disease is still there. The disease is still there. Also, what Mario mentioned, it is also super true. When you get in a drought, this is not that you're gonna get out of the drought in 2 years or 3. This one, just get into the drought, take a seat, because 10 to 15 years later, you're gonna make it. And this is something that as we are starting a new cycle and so on, we need to start addressing. And the drought, which is this variability, in conjunction with an increased use of water. El destino nos alcanzó. Yeah, the destiny just reached us. We are there.
Excellent comments, and I agree with them. I think what we need to have, it maybe is now a forced discussion of what Mario and I have been talking about and what he terms the elephants in the room. When are we going to have an honest discussion and a recognition of the over-appropriated state of the sub-basins? When are we going to have a recognition that political decisions for expediency, where winners and losers were picked, make no mistake, back in the decisions that Mexico made in the 90s, early 90s, they picked Chihuahua to win and Tamaulipas to lose. And they also did it to where the treaty would lose unless it rained. Until you have that level of candor and transparency, those of us that have spent 20, 25 years on this issue will come back in a time war 25 years from now, and we will have the exact same issue. I reiterate what I've said before. The problem is not the treaty. The problem is a willingness to comply.
Gabriel?
Nothing really to add.
You agree with everything?
I agree with everything that's been said.
Let me,
no need to waste time.
before we get into...
Rosario, just one
yes.
thing, but what Carlos is mentioned, yeah, and the treaty is not the problem. And I think the treaty is a good excuse to have a very well-balanced system, to have a system that works for everyone. It is the perfect excuse, and it was designed to be that one. And if we look at it more than, oh man, I have to comply, oh man, I have to go to school, if we say like, oh my God, I'm gonna learn something, the treaty will help us out, it is a perfect excuse. I think that's another change in vision. The treaty can help everyone.
Can I add something?
Of course.
A little more controversial facts. We are here in this situation of crisis. The crisis has not disappeared. We need to understand what we are in the starting part of the crisis. Why? We expect more drought. So Mexico will not deliver what has supposed to be delivering for this first year. So we will be lagging back once again. And since there's no water, and Mexico is under a huge political turmoil, many other things, just as the Mexican new law is also on the table, and has not been issued. The discussion is still running. No final decisions have been made. For your information, maybe you know, there will be a new general director in CONAGUA. So there will be new changes in the policy in how to approach the topics in terms of water decisions, water allocations. And this big void of authority has been filled by the stakeholders. Unfortunately, they knew how to pressure the Mexican authorities to get more water. The example of what Carlos said, that instead of looking for the water supply for Monterrey and for the cities at the border in the northern Tamaulipas, the farmers in Tamaulipas pressured CONAGUA to release a bit of water, but with the efficiencies of moving the push water from the point of the Falcon Dam downstream, they will lose 30% of that water. It is useless to think we're doing the right things. These kinds of things have not been considered while signing the minute. So these are facts that nobody wants to talk about in public except Mario, because they feel afraid to do that. I don't have any problem saying that because I don't work in Mexico. I work for the World Bank in Saudi Arabia, and recently I joined a work in South African countries. So I have no point in hiding what is really the disease of the Rio Bravo Basin. These things have not been considered in signing the minute. The treaty is not the problem. The treaty gives rules, gives boundaries. The implementation is what really matters, on the Mexican side at least.
Let me ask a question, if I may, Rosario.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think we all agree that the treaty is not the problem. The U.S. side, not the problem. It's a domestic political, even science problem on the Mexican side. What could the U.S. do? Because the Mexican side, we can talk all day long what the Mexicans should do, right? What CONAGUA should do, what the council should do, what all the different components and parts, what the stakeholders. But what could this U.S. even think of doing to try to help this along, or try to push, cajole? And yes, I'm looking right at you, Carlos.
Okay, two things. You said the U.S. is not the problem. I will tell you from personal experience that on one hand, when the U.S. understands the flexibilities that are allowed within the treaty and is willing to cooperate with Mexico in the utilization of those flexibilities, better things and better outcomes come to play. So in that regard, we have failed of late. And I'll say it, and I have no problem with it. The other thing the U.S. could do, and you want to talk about throwing bombs, is you got to link the deliveries in the Colorado to the deliveries and compliance in the Rio Grande. This thing about it's two basins and don't link them. Hey, I'm not linking them. The treaty did. They're both in the same damn treaty. And so what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
So this, I guess, the future of the basin is a co-responsibility of both countries. It's not just a matter of compliance to the treaty.
Correct.
Is that what it's been said here?
Yep.
So it's something more than just the treaty.
Correct.
Okay. So from what I've been hearing today, before we get to the Q&A sessions, we have a couple of questions there from the audience. So the treaty is short. It's perfect because it's flexible, it's adaptable, but it's short in terms of compromise. No.
What do you mean?
It's not.
No.
What do you mean?
It's short in terms of.
No. The treaty
Where
is,
the
I
responsibility.
disagree on that.
I do too.
Yeah, I do. I think I do too. That's why I want to ask what do you mean by that?
Okay, hold
That's
on,
correct.
hold on.
Yeah, you just lost the panel. Rosario.
That's why I'm not in the panel.
You were looking
To
at another
me,
panel, not this one.
Well, to me, it's short because at the end of the day, nobody seems responsible for the basing.
It is not responsibility of the basing of the treaty. It is not responsible for the basing.
It should.
The
It
treaty,
should not be-
the treaty gives rules. And as Carlos said, some rules are flexible and that needs to be understood. And some rules are strict. The interpretation or reading the correct way the treaty, it is what matters. Who are responsible for the basin are both nations to apply correctly the treaty. The treaty has been considered, and I've been there to challenge other people who said that the treaty, as you say, is short. The treaty, and Gabriel knows that, has been an example of best practices in the world, how to do cooperation among nations and how to do and solve things. The problem is that both nations, as Carlos said, have not understood and complied truly in terms of how many water users do Mexico really have, how much water do they really take, and how much water do they really are owed to. And this applies on both sides. Efficiency in the basin, it is the same thing in both parts of the basin, in the US and in Mexico.
But you have to also recognize that the treaty has worked a lot better on the Colorado, but it's the same treaty, it's the same mechanism. And it's just that the parties have decided to take it, to interpret those provisions and to use those provisions. I mean, this whole system, the whole minute system, I think it was absolutely revolutionary. And I still think today it's revolutionary. And I don't know of any other place that uses this system that we have here. And it allows for adaptation to the point where I will interpret these minutes as amendments. And I know IBWC doesn't like that. Those are interpretations, right? I think they really push the line on some of these things. They go into amendments. And look what they've done on the Colorado. I mean, the last few years, the last number of minutes have been really thoughtful, constructive, inclusive. I mean, very, very, I mean, this is the way it's supposed to work. Maybe it's not perfect. That approach has not been taken on the Rio Grande. Why? Yes, different political situation, different concerns and issues, but I don't see why that treaty can't equally apply or be equally as successful on the Rio Grande.
Gabe, I think you just hit on something that is also being discussed in the chat, and I appreciate and respect the comments from Ted. It is from where do you see the treaty? So why is the Colorado cooperative? It's cooperative because you actually have something to trade on both sides. Why is the Rio Grande not cooperative? Because Mexico has to, all that Mexico is required to do is deliver. It gets nothing in return if you look at a myopic view of just the Rio Grande. And so the impetus for cooperation is lacking from that party on the Rio Grande, where it does have something of benefit and trade on the Colorado. And that's why I go back, and I know that I'm going to upset a lot of folks, but until you link them, because the treaty linked them, we're going to continue to cheat ourselves of the greater good in overall compliance in the treaty.
The other one that Carlos is mentioning that so there are greater benefits in collaboration than in just acting separate. And to be painfully clear on this one, So if Mexico delivers water more timely, it will not only help Texans, it will help Tamaulipans, Coahuilans, it will help them, okay? Now, it will also help to reset the treaty cycle. It will help to have greater storage in the reservoirs, and we may have a storm that will fulfill it. If the states, if the Texas Water Master also works in a way that secure, does not over apply water or over divert water, we're going to have greater storage on the US side, and that will also help to reset the storage. It will keep it at a higher level. The idea here is that, and we play the opposite game, which is the cat and mouse. One doesn't deliver, the other one always keeps the reservoirs low. And then you're playing cat and mouse. If that every time that I say that our systems or our fate is together, is because if for this treaty to work, Mexico has to do its part, the US has to do its part, and it will benefit both.
Someone, I disagree with a comment you made, and I'm sorry, I have to call it out. You mentioned, if I heard correctly, that the water master is allowing an over-diversion of water by Texas. I totally disagree with that. And I think it's based, I think understanding how the system works for Texas would help clarify that. Water rights for Texas are allowed to store 145% of their value in the reservoirs, which goes to the point you're making, but they're not allowed to divert that water in any given year. Every single diversion on the Texas side is metered and monitored. You can't say that from the other side. So I'm sorry, my friend, but I have to take issue with that.
But that is okay, because so having this discussion, I agree, it's not the water master, it's the individual users. However, the individual users, as they are calling for water, I mean, again, if they call for a little bit more, reservoirs will go down. That is a very interesting system. It puts the pressure on the users, not on the institution, which is the opposite on the Mexican side. The pressure is on the institution, it's not on the users.
And Mario will recognize and affirm that many times we had discussion of actually Texas water being inappropriately diverted by Mexican users simply based on release patterns.
You're correct. You're right. You're right. Many times we had that discussions, and I want to raise one of the things that is on the chat: leadership. In the Colorado, when the minutes were negotiated in a long process, there were leadership on both sides, and we respected ourselves. And what I mean for that is, professionally, we knew who we were and up to what decisions could we take and which decisions could not be taken by us. And we didn't grew the problem to the politician decision. We stopped that. We didn't allow to grow the problem so that a politician would come and say to us, we will do this, like what happened in the Bravo. This is an issue. Decisions of how to manage the farmers in Chihuahua, how to manage the farmers in Tamaulipas are political decisions, not technical decisions, not wise decisions, not communications decisions. And this has brought into, there were voices in Mexico at that time that said, Mexico will not comply, and would say, we don't want to comply to the treaty. And that's no problem. Nothing will happen. Other voices were said, no, we need to comply because at that time, Donald Trump will kick the ass of Mexican president. Well, many people were opinionating on what has happened instead of the professionals who knew how to handle things. Why was that? Lack of leadership. Lack of leadership, how to handle things wisely and properly as best practices that are in all parts of the world. They recommend there are manuals, handbooks, guidelines, how to handle these things. None of them were applied in the negotiation of minute 325. I'm sorry to say that.
Rosario, just one
Yes.
last comment with what Mari is mentioning. Hey, this also living in California and understanding the system in here, it's quite something. I think one is I think we can take a look or a peek in the Colorado River, but the reality is that we have very good technical resources, savvy people, and leadership in this in the Rio Grande. That it hasn't been heard or it hasn't been considered, or that's a different story. And in that one, I think perhaps, and the conditions are super different. Also, what Carlos mentioned, in that there is some give and take on the Colorado here. It hasn't been that explicitly explained. I do think in this one is rather than look to the outside, look at the discussion here that we have. This is, we went from minute 325 to actually trying to solve the problems of the Rio Grande and the symptoms and all the diseases. I do think that there is leadership, there is knowledge in here. What I do think is how to move it a little bit, one step, two steps forward. I don't know.
Let me jump in, and I'm going to do another crazy question that you all disagree with. But so the same people that manage water in Mexico manage the Rio Grande and the Rio Colorado, right? Right?
Yes and no.
Okay, let's start with the yes.
Well,
So it looks like we have the perfect story in the Colorado River Basin.
not the perfect.
No, not the perfect, but compared to the Bravo that we're suffering, it seems like two different countries, and it's the same centralized system government in the Mexico side, at least, right?
Let me explain. Let me explain a little bit more, Rosario.
Oh, but let me just finish so everybody can wrap up about this. So, what is the difference?
It is a huge difference.
I know we all know it's a huge difference, but where is it?
Technically, there are the same people today,
Okay.
1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But when minute 319 and all the previous meters were negotiated, there were different kinds of people in Mexican Conagua and SILA, and IBWC and USBR. Different kinds of people.
Okay.
With leadership. The people who negotiated minute 325 are not the same people that negotiated that minute at that time.
So
Definitely. On both sides.
Are you saying this story with the Colorado River is going to change now from now on?
No. What I mean is,
it could.
Well, it could, yes, but the path is already taken. So we know where to go.
Okay.
So the Mexican authorities need only to follow the path, because that negotiation took time and was negotiated wisely for both countries. In the Bravo, it is the opposite round.
Okay.
And just to,
but this story has always been the same.
No. I think part of it is what Mario is saying is that you had prior to the negotiation of those minutes on the Colorado and the negotiation of the minutes of 325. Okay, different groups. But I think what you're asking is, well, what else is different? Well, I mean, you can obviously talk about the hydrography, and climate and so on. I think Carlos's point about incentives is really a strong point. What are the incentives on the Colorado for the two parties to participate versus what are the incentives on the Rio Grande for the two parties to participate and how they would want to participate. On the Rio Grande, there's a whole domestic element that is nowhere near, it's just so much stronger on the Rio Grande. It's almost non-existent. There's still something there in the Colorado, but because of the incentive system, it is much more cooperative than it is on the Rio Grande. On the Rio Grande, there is a lot more work that needs to be done domestically before Mexico can even come up to the table. And that is a huge difference in terms of how you negotiate what happens on these two rivers.
I agree with Grave. If I was to characterize how compliance on the Rio Grande is viewed by Mexico, and please don't get me wrong, I was born in Mexico, I'm very proud of it. But you know the old saying, están más cerca mis dientes que mis parientes? That's the way I think the basin has been managed on the Rio Grande.
Es algo así como pobre México tan cerca de
Something like this.
de
Poor
Dios
Mexico,
y tan
so
lejos de
close
Estados
to God
Unidos.
and so
Okay.
far from the United States.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, so close to the United States and so far from God.
But I think, I mean, again, yeah, the incentives are a little bit more tangible. There are still similar problems of the one that we're seeing here in the Colorado. Still, people from Valle de Mexicali, they have the upper hand and they don't want to share any water with Tijuana, Ensenada, Valle de Guadalupe. There is still a tension there. Water, sometimes it doesn't come with the right water quality, so you have to dilute it, and the groundwater overdraft on the Valle de Mexicali, that's huge. That's so there are, I mean, it's the Colorado is not rosy by no means. But I do think that, yeah, I mean, when you have some incentives or something to trade, or that really helps out. And they have developed also the trust.
Yes, trust.
That's where I wanted to get. That's where I wanted
about
to get.
say.
Exactly. That's where I wanted to get. The relationship between institutions, stakeholders, local officials or local leaderships are much more stronger and compared to the ones on the Rio Grande Basin. That's where I wanted to get.
I endorse what Gabriel said regarding that Mexico needs to conclude its internal negotiation. If it doesn't conclude the internal negotiations within states, within the Basin Council, among the stakeholders, and if this is process not concluded and the US is pressing the time to achieve water allocation rules, that would make more longer. That will take more longer to reach to a final allocation that it is good for both countries.
And
I must say so.
Sorry.
Today, this is not feasible. The Mexican model, and Samuel knows that, the Mexican model is almost helpful, mostly useless, almost helpful, because it does not comply with the treaty. And also the model has made created some divisions within the farmers, with Tamaulipas and Chihuahua, because they were fighting, helped by the authorities' decisions. This must be corrected. Again, this is not a technical issue. It is a social and administrative legal issue allowed to grow by CONAGUA. And restoring that path needs time. And the US needs to understand that this will take time. But once again, it is all about trust. The US will say, how many times have you said before that you needed time to comply, to finish the unfinished business? Well, the social media knows. You can see in Twitter, you can see in WhatsApp, you can see in Instagram what's happening in Mexico. So now information is power in terms of they know what's happening, the domestic problems that are happening in Mexico. Everything is public. But once again, as you said, Rosario, it is all about trust, but with leadership. Otherwise, it is really a problem.
Well, and I think you would agree that a significant way of building trust of why the Colorado works and why the Rio Grande doesn't is in the Colorado, the basin is managed for compliance. That is not the case in the Rio Grande by Mexico. And until that happens, you're not going to be able to start building trust. And I'm not saying get a model that shows the full 350. Right now, there is no model that shows even 1 acre-foot of water for compliance on the Rio Grande. And until that changes, you're not going to be able to overcome the trust issues.
If I can
Gabriel, you
jump
wanted
in.
to say something.
Yeah, just a great comparison, because Randy brought in an interesting question about incentives within the United States, San Diego, and the diversions. Those are internal politics, internal issues. Just like we have these internal issues on the Conchos and Tamaulipas and all internal to Mexico, we have these internal issues that we have to deal with in the U.S. And we have very different incentives for the upper basin versus the lower basin, California versus everybody else, and completely different incentives. But as Carlos was saying, they are able to manage all those incentives and negotiate and deal with those very diverse, very almost antagonistic perspectives in some cases, and come up with a position that complies with the treaty on the Colorado. And there, in the U.S. has to deliver 1.5 million acre feet down into Mexico, and that's the obligation. They have to figure out how to do it. Mexico, that's what Mexico needs to do. They need to come up with their own internal system to come up with, deal with this domestic incentives in relation to the international bilateral incentive. And that's what you ask for the differences. They're able to do it on the Colorado. They haven't quite figured out how to do this in Mexico.
And I fully support that one. I mean, between California, the QSA or the Quantitative Settlement Agreement, so the Colorado River Compact and all the different agreements between the states and so on, and within the states, it is this kind of tier or layer approach that it has been. And then if you go back to Mexico, then again, this Valle de Mexicali, Tijuana, Ensenada, all of they are kind of also ironing down, but it has been a more kind of a structured approach. And here, it hasn't been that structure in some parts of the basin. And this is also, but this is not because of lack of not thinking of it. Again, just for you to know, the Rio Bravo Compact, el Reglamento de Aguas. So, I mean, we have already passed the quinceañera party, 15 years. It hasn't passed. This is true. And then we will go to what will be the silver anniversary, 25 years. This is super sad, guys. Man, and it's not the entire solution. It is just one of the solutions of many of the incentives and so on. But that is the level that we've been trying to do this for many years. Mario.
That's correct. Yes, I fully agree. On the Colorado, they had strong institutions to handle incentives and to handle things. Strong institutions. On the Mexican side, unfortunately, not that strong institutions. And as Samuel is saying, the Mexican allocation rules are not enough. It is just like the treaty. What if the rules are there? What if we publish the rules in the official diary of Mexico and nobody complies? Who enforces those rules? Who helps the Mexican authority to enforce the law? We need also reduction in the number of water users. Will the Mexican authority do that? We need to secure water for the cities. Mexico do have money to create new water sources for the cities. We'll build a desalination plant, just like we discussed many times with Carlos in Bronzeville, to take water for Matamoros and for the Frontera Chica up to the to Falcon Dam to Reynosa. There are many things to be solved in the Mexican side. So all of that pieces needs to be fit in to really make possible to Mexico to comply with the treaty. Unfortunately, and that kind of things need to be thought and analyzed on both sides. This is the flexibility that Carlos just talked about, to understand. When we negotiated in the Colorado, we knew what was happening on the US side. The discussions among the states, we knew. We were having information from that side. We understood the discussion that was taking place there. And we knew we didn't have to press the US in order to take an agreement within the states and then come to Mexico to negotiate. That kind of thing has not happened on the Bravo. Mexico is still struggling to handle the water in the Colorado, in the Bravo Basin. This is a fact. So these kinds of things need to be understood. That's why I'm thinking that Minute 325 was rushly signed. They should have been separated. The issues to solve for the long term, for the long run, and closing the cycle is another matter. So it was a mistake. I'm sorry to say that.
Okay. We are past the half an hour, the hour and a half, I meant. And I just want to, I want you guys to give you like 30 seconds of last thoughts. But before that, let me try this again. And hope now you agree. So it looks like we have the perfect treaty that we do not deserve, that we are unable to use it as it should be used, at least on the Mexico side. We don't know how to apply it efficiently, effectively. We don't know how to use it, the resource that it provides, to efficiently allocate and compromise and commit our responsibility to the basins. So we don't have a problem with the treaty. We have a problem with trust. We have a problem with incentives. We have a problem with over-allocated basins, sub-basins. We have a problem with engagement, with compromise. So we just have water issues, regardless of the treaty. So the treaty is not going to solve our water issues, especially not those that rely on international river basins. And we should all understand that the treaty is never going to be enough. And that's what I meant when I said short. It's not going to be enough to solve the crisis, any water crisis that we could have. And then we will have from start, it's not going to stop. It's just going to get worse because predictions are just getting worse. Population growth, climate change, all that. So we do have the instrument to deal with it legally. We need much more than that. Am I right? Am I correct so far? You all agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well said.
Good. So
99% true.
Yeah, of course. I'm not going to get 100% with you.
The bottom line is in the absence of what we have, another document would actually be counterproductive. The problem is people. The problem is not the framework.
Last thoughts, Samuel?
It was a very interesting session and a luxury. I mean, I don't want to keep 2 or 3 thoughts in mind. So one, we're asking water to the desert. So please always remember that. The second one is that the destiny of all the users are tied together, and we should think about that one. And then the other one is that the destiny reached us. So that kind of thing in the future of climate change, overuse of water and so on, yeah, we're actually there and we're way passing it. And we'll have to adjust. Thanks, everyone.
Carlos, you have a final thought? You said your final thought, right, already? Gabriel?
Yeah.
I'll just say this last point, building on what others have said. The treaty, it's not the perfect Swiss Army knife, okay? It's a good tool, but a tool is only as good as the people who wield it. And if we don't know how to wield it, if we don't wield that tool properly, it's worthless. So it's a good treaty. It's a very good treaty. And we just need to make better use of it.
Mario, did you just say your last word?
No, my last words are this. Sorry about taking the mic. The topic of this coffee break was minute 325, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. I would say we need to amend minute 325. I'm saying it once again and loud. We need to amend minute 325. The environmental flows is a pending issue, and it is not considered in minute 325. And this is really a huge mistake. I think that we need to help to amend. All of us, all that people who is participating in this coffee break, we need to help the authorities to amend that minute. Otherwise, we will suffer instead of having a good application of minute 325. That are my final thoughts.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, everyone who stayed over the hour and a half with us.
Carlos,
I guess it was pretty hot. I told you it was gonna get pretty hot today. Carlos, did you say your final thoughts?
Yeah.
I believe you were.
Let's just do it again. Let's keep the conversation going. I think what is really appealing about this is the openness and candor that is required to advance the discussion. So in the absence of somebody else doing it, then let's continue the discussion. Happy to do it again.
Yes.
Indeed.
We ran out of coffee today, but we will certainly have more in the future. So thank you everyone for the questions that you sent us on the chat. We tried somehow to cover most of them. If not, we will post it on the blog so everyone can follow up on that. And with our panelists today, thank you very much for the patience, for the